October 25th, 1944. Battle of Leyte Gulf. 0617 hours. A single word tears through the steel corridors of USS Iowa like a bullet through flesh. Fire. 9 barrels erupt simultaneously. The blast wave rips across the deck with the force of a Category 5 hurricane made entirely of thunder and rage. 2,700 pounds of hardened steel screams into the sky at 2,500 feet per second. The shockwave slams men against bulkheads so hard their teeth crack. Eardrums rupture. Coffee mugs shatter on tables 3 decks below. The entire ship convulses like a dying beast, dragged back to life by pure violence. Smoke and fire twist together in a dance so brutal that morning turns to midnight in half a heartbeat. 47 miles away, across an ocean so vast that the curvature of the earth hides the enemy completely from sight. 7 Japanese warships are about to be erased from existence. Here is a number that should terrify you. In the first 18 minutes of this engagement, the USS Iowa and her sister ships will obliterate 7 enemy vessels from a distance so impossible that Japanese survivors will later tell interrogators they believed they were being attacked by invisible bombers dropping shells from the stratosphere. Not aircraft, not submarines. Battleship shells falling from the sky like the fists of an angry god. 0 American casualties. Not 1 scratch. Not 1 bruise. Not 1 man lost. But here is what nobody tells you about this massacre. The man who made it all possible was not an admiral with decades of experience. He was not a genius inventor from MIT. He was not even supposed to be in the Navy. His name was Willis Augustus Lee, a Kentucky farm boy who could not stop calculating numbers in his head, a man whose idea was called insane by every senior officer who heard it. And by the time the Japanese figured out what he had done, their Pacific fleet was already burning from horizon to horizon. Let me take you back to 1942. The Pacific Ocean has become an American graveyard. Savo Island. August 9th, 1942. 4 Allied cruisers sink in 45 minutes. 1,077 American sailors die screaming in water so hot from burning fuel that rescue swimmers suffer third-degree burns just trying to save their drowning brothers. The Japanese lose nothing. Absolutely nothing. Tassafaronga. November 30th, 1942. 8 American warships engage 4 Japanese destroyers. Logic says the Americans should annihilate them. Mathematics says the Americans should win without breaking a sweat. Reality says something entirely different. The destroyers win. 1 American cruiser explodes so violently that flaming debris lands on ships 3 miles away. 395 men killed in seconds. 206 more wounded so badly they will never serve again. The problem has a name. The Long Lance Torpedo, Japanese Type 93. This weapon travels at 49 knots through the water. It carries 1,000 pounds of high explosive packed into a cylinder of death. It leaves almost no visible wake. American captains cannot see it coming until their ships are already breaking apart beneath their feet. Every admiral in the Pacific knows the mathematics of this nightmare, and every admiral knows there is no answer. Get close enough to hit Japanese ships with your guns and their torpedoes kill you first. Stay far enough away to avoid their torpedoes and your guns cannot hit anything. It is a death equation with no solution. A mathematical trap that kills American sailors by the thousands. The men have a name for this horror. They call it the Tokyo Express. Japanese ships appear from nowhere at night. They launch their invisible torpedoes. They disappear before American guns can even respond. Bodies wash up on island beaches for weeks afterward. Dog tags, life jackets. Sometimes just pieces of what used to be young men with families waiting at home. The Navy tries everything. Radar-guided searchlights. Useless. New armor-piercing shells. Useless. Coordinated air support. Weather cancels half the missions. Nothing works. By early 1944, American surface ship losses have reached critical levels. Families across America are receiving telegrams every single day. We regret to inform you. We regret to inform you. We regret to inform you. The brass in Washington is panicking. Admiral King is screaming at subordinates until veins bulge in his neck. Admiral Nimitz cannot sleep. The Joint Chiefs are seriously considering whether to abandon surface engagements entirely and rely only on submarines and aircraft. But then something unexpected happens. A captain nobody respects walks into a briefing room with an idea everyone calls insane. Willis Augustus Lee does not look like a man who will change the history of naval warfare. He is 46 years old, thin as a rail, quiet as a church mouse. He wears thick glasses that make him look more like an accountant than a combat officer. He mumbles when he speaks. Senior officers often ask him to repeat himself twice before they understand a single word. But Willis Lee carries a secret weapon between his ears. He sees numbers the way other men see colors. When he was 12 years old, he calculated the trajectory of a thrown baseball so precisely that he won every single carnival game at the Kentucky State Fair. His father thought he was cheating. He was not cheating. He was simply seeing the mathematics that governed the universe and nobody else could see. When Lee was 19, he represented the United States at the 1920 Olympic Games in Antwerp, Belgium. Shooting competitions. He won 7 medals. 7. No American shooter before or since has ever matched that record. He did not win because he had the steadiest hands. He won because he could calculate wind drift, bullet drop, and atmospheric resistance faster than other men could blink. Lee does not trust tradition. He does not trust experience. He does not trust the gut feelings that other officers worship like Holy Scripture. He trusts only one thing: mathematics. Cold, pure, incorruptible mathematics. In late 1943, Lee begins studying something that every other officer in the Pacific completely ignores: the Mark 8 fire control radar being installed on American battleships. Every other captain sees a detection device, a fancy machine that tells you where the enemy is hiding. Lee sees something completely different. He sees a targeting system. He sees a revolution waiting to be born. Here is his idea broken down to its bones. Radar tracks enemy ships beyond the horizon. You cannot see them with your eyes, but the radar sees them perfectly. The Mark 1. A fire control computer takes that radar data and calculates exactly where to point the guns. It accounts for wind speed, air temperature, the rotation of the Earth itself, ship movement, wave action, humidity, barrel wear, powder temperature. Hundreds of variables, all computed in seconds by gears and mechanical circuits that never get tired and never make emotional mistakes. Then the 16-inch guns fire. The shells travel higher than any aircraft can fly. They arc through the upper atmosphere like man-made meteors streaking across the edge of space. They come screaming down 47 miles away, and they do not land near the target. They do not splash close to the target. They hit the target directly. Lee takes this revolutionary concept to his superiors in January 1944. They laugh in his face. Rear Admiral Theodore Chandler calls it theoretical nonsense that belongs in a science fiction novel. A vice admiral whose name history has mercifully forgotten asks Lee if he has been drinking on duty. Another flag officer walks out of the briefing before Lee even finishes his first sentence. The established gunnery doctrine is crystal clear. Radar is useful for detection, not targeting. The scatter pattern of shells at extreme range makes precision impossible. This is not opinion. This is physics. This is mathematics. This is absolute fact. At least that is what everyone believes. Lee does not argue. He does not complain. He does not write angry letters to Washington. He simply requests transfer to USS Iowa. The Iowa-class battleships are the most powerful warships ever constructed by human hands. Their 9 16-inch guns can throw shells nearly 47 miles. Their Mark 1A fire control computers are mechanical marvels that solve equations in seconds, which would take human mathematicians hours with pencils and paper. Lee wants to prove his theory works. He just needs a ship capable of proving it. and he needs a crew willing to try something that nobody has ever attempted in the entire history of naval warfare. He gets the Iowa, and he finds a man named Harold Jeff. Harold Jeff is 23 years old when he joins Iowa's crew in March 1944. Before the war, he welded steel beams in Pittsburgh shipyards for 14 hours a day. He has never fired a weapon larger than his grandfather's hunting rifle. He has never traveled more than 200 miles from his hometown. His hands are calloused from honest labor. His dreams are simple: survive the war, go home, marry his sweetheart, raise a family. Now he is loading shells that weigh more than his father's car into guns that can reach targets his eyes will never see. Jeff is assigned to Turret 2. His job sounds simple, but will break lesser men. When the bell rings, he helps load a 2,700-pound shell into the breech. Then he helps load 6 powder bags, each one containing enough explosive to kill everyone in the turret if mishandled. Then he steps back. Then the gun fires with a sound like God himself slamming a door shut on the entire world. Then he does it all again, every 30 seconds. The shells are so heavy that loading crews suffer hernias, broken fingers, and crushed feet. One mistake kills everyone in the turret instantly. There are no second chances at this job. Ever. Lee begins his secret experiments in June 1944. The tests are completely unofficial. He does not request permission because he knows permission will be denied. He simply orders his fire control teams to track targets at extreme range and calculate theoretical firing solutions without actually pulling the trigger. The numbers come back more promising than even Lee dared to hope. The Mark 1A computer is achieving accuracy predictions that should be impossible, according to every gunnery manual ever written. In August 1944, Lee requests official permission for a live fire exercise at 30 miles. Denied. He requests again. Denied. A third time. Denied. A fourth time, with data from his unofficial experiments attached to the request. This time, Admiral Nimitz himself reviews the paperwork. Something in Lee's numbers catches the attention of the most powerful naval officer in the Pacific. Permission granted. September 1944. Waters, northeast of Hawaii. The target is a decommissioned freighter anchored 47 miles from Iowa. Every flag officer in the Pacific has been invited to observe. Most of them expect to watch Lee humiliate himself publicly. Admiral Chandler has brought junior officers specifically to show them what happens when theoretical nonsense meets cold reality. Harold Jeff stands at his station in Turret 2. He does not know that this test will determine the future of naval warfare. He only knows the gun captain looks more nervous than he has ever seen any man look. The fire control team inputs radar data. The Mark 1A computes. Gears turn. Solutions emerge. The turrets rotate. The massive barrels elevate toward an angle that seems wrong. They are pointing at the sky, not the horizon. Captain Lee gives the order. Fire. The shells disappear into the clouds. 114 seconds of absolute silence. Every officer on the observation ship holds their breath. Then, the target freighter explodes. Direct hit. 47 miles. First attempt. Admiral Chandler lowers his binoculars. His face has turned the color of old paper. Lee orders a second salvo. Another hit. A third. 7 hits out of 9 shells at a distance that every gunnery manual in existence says cannot be achieved. The rules of naval warfare are being rewritten in fire and thunder. But proving the concept in a controlled test is one thing. The real question remains: can these methods work in actual combat against an enemy that is shooting back and maneuvering at 30 knots and launching those invisible long-lance torpedoes? Can Willis Lee's impossible idea save the lives of American sailors dying every single week? In Part 2, we will see what happens when Iowa meets the Imperial Japanese Navy for the first time. We will witness the annihilation of 7 enemy warships from 47 miles away. We will follow Harold Jeff into the most devastating long-range naval engagement in recorded history. And we will discover that Lee's own navy contains enemies far more dangerous than any Japanese admiral ever born. The guns are loaded. The mathematics are sound. The revolution is about to begin. In Part 1, Captain Willis Lee proved the impossible. A Kentucky farm boy with thick glasses and a gift for mathematics demonstrated that radar could guide 16-inch shells to targets 47 miles away. His crew aboard USS Iowa achieved accuracy rates that every gunnery manual said could not exist. 7 hits out of 9 shells. Direct strikes at distances that should have been pure fantasy. But proving a concept in a controlled test is one thing. Convincing an entire navy to abandon decades of sacred tradition is something else entirely. Here is a number that should disturb you. In the 3 weeks following Iowa's historic demonstration, 17 American ships were sunk or damaged in the Pacific using conventional tactics. 17 vessels. Thousands of sailors dead or wounded because the men in Washington refused to believe what had already been proven in fire and steel. And this is where everything became worse. The report from Iowa's September demonstration landed on the desk of Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance 3 days after the test. Spruance was one of the most respected commanders in the Pacific Fleet. His decisions at Midway had turned the tide of the entire war. His opinion carried weight that could build careers or destroy them with a single sentence. He read the report twice. Then he summoned his staff for an emergency meeting. The gathering took place in a cramped conference room aboard USS Indianapolis. 12 senior officers were present. Men who had collectively commanded fleets across 2 oceans. Men who had spent their entire careers mastering the art of naval gunnery the traditional way. Men who saw Willis Lee as a direct threat to everything they had built over lifetimes of service. Lee stood at the far end of the table. His report spread before admirals who regarded him with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to open hostility. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and tension thick enough to choke on. The first objection came from Rear Admiral Theodore Chandler, a gunnery specialist who had written the Navy's standard manual on battleship tactics. The same manual that every officer in that room had memorized during their training at Annapolis. 47 miles. Chandler's voice dripped with contempt that could strip paint off a bulkhead. Captain Lee, I have commanded gun crews for 20 years. I have seen what happens to accuracy beyond 15 miles. You expect us to believe your ship achieved consistent hits at ranges that violate basic ballistic principles? Lee remained perfectly calm. His voice was steady as bedrock. The Mark 8 radar system combined with the Mark 1. A fire control computer eliminates human error from the targeting equation. The mathematics are sound, Admiral. The results speak for themselves. Results from a single demonstration. Another admiral interrupted before Lee could draw breath. Against a stationary freighter. What happens when you face a real battle group maneuvering at 30 knots? What happens when the enemy is shooting back and launching torpedoes at your hull? The room erupted. Officers who had spent careers mastering visual gunnery saw Lee's methods as a personal insult to their entire professional existence. Supply officers questioned the astronomical cost of retraining thousands of sailors. Others doubted whether the technology could be replicated across an entire fleet of battleships scattered across the largest ocean on Earth. But the most damaging objection came from Chandler himself. His words were measured and devastating as a torpedo strike. The Navy has invested millions of dollars training our gunners to fight according to established doctrine. You are asking us to throw that investment away based on one lucky demonstration. If we implement your methods fleet-wide, and they fail in a major engagement, the consequences would be catastrophic. I will not stake my reputation on unproven theory. Lee felt his opportunity slipping through his fingers like water. He took a breath and spoke words that would either save his career or end it permanently. Admiral, with all respect, those are American sailors dying every single week because we refuse to adapt. The Japanese are not waiting for us to perfect our methods. They are killing our men right now, today, this hour. Every day we delay is measured in telegrams sent to American families. The room went silent. Lee had crossed an invisible line. Challenging a flag officer's judgment in front of peers was career suicide in any Navy on Earth. Every man in that room knew it. Spruance finally spoke. His voice was measured and cold as Arctic ice. "Captain Lee, your tactical innovation is noted. However, this committee is not prepared to recommend fleet-wide changes based on a single demonstration. You are ordered to return to your command and continue standard operations. This matter is closed." Lee walked out of that room knowing his methods could save thousands of American lives. He also knew the Navy would let men die rather than admit they were wrong. But he was about to find an ally in the most unexpected place imaginable. Commander Joseph Rochefort was not a gunnery officer. He was an intelligence specialist. The man whose code-breaking work had made the victory at Midway possible. The man who had cracked Japanese naval codes when everyone told him it could not be done. Rochefort understood something that admirals in their polished conference rooms often forgot. War rewarded innovation. It punished tradition with blood and fire and the screams of drowning men. Rochefort had obtained a copy of Lee's report through unofficial channels. He had studied the radar data, the firing solutions, the kill probabilities. He had run his own calculations late into the night, cigarette after cigarette burning down to nothing in his ashtray. And he had reached a conclusion that the gunnery establishment refused to accept. Lee was right. The technology worked. Every day the Navy delayed implementation was a day measured in American blood spilled into the Pacific. Rochefort arranged a private meeting with Admiral Chester Nimitz himself, Commander-in-Chief of the entire Pacific Fleet, the most powerful naval officer in the Western Hemisphere. He brought Lee with him. The conversation lasted 3 hours behind closed doors. Rochefort presented intelligence showing Japanese fleet movements that would put American ships in grave danger within weeks. Lee demonstrated his fire control methods using charts and calculations that even Nimitz, who was not a gunnery specialist, could follow clearly. At the end of the meeting, Nimitz made a decision that would change the course of the war. "You will have your official test." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "One demonstration. Every flag officer in the Pacific will be invited to observe. If your methods work as you claim, I will personally authorize fleet-wide implementation. If they fail, your career is over." Do you understand what I am saying? Captain Lee understood perfectly. He had one chance to prove that 47 miles was not a fluke. One chance to save the lives of sailors who would otherwise die in conventional engagements. One chance to drag the United States Navy kicking and screaming into the future. If he failed, everything was finished. His career, his methods, his revolution. All of it dead and buried. The test was scheduled for November 12, 1944. Location waters northeast of the Marshall Islands. Target a decommissioned cruiser towed into position at exactly 47 miles. The longest distance ever attempted in any official naval gunnery exercise in the entire history of warfare on the open ocean. If Iowa missed, Lee was finished forever. If Iowa hit, everything would change. November 12th dawned gray and angry. Sea state was classified as moderate to rough. Swells of 6 to 8 feet rolled across the test area like liquid mountains trying to throw the ship off balance. Wind gusted to 18 knots from the northwest. Visibility was poor. These conditions were deliberately chosen. Admiral Chandler had insisted that any demonstration must prove the technology could work in realistic combat conditions. Not calm seas, not perfect weather. Real conditions where real sailors would have to fight and die. 11 flag officers gathered aboard the observation ship USS Baltimore. Their binoculars trained on the distant horizon where Iowa waited somewhere beyond sight. Guns loaded. Crew at battle stations. Fate hanging in the balance like a sword over every man's head. Among the observers stood Chandler himself. Arms crossed over his chest. His expression suggested he already knew exactly how this demonstration would end. He had brought junior officers specifically to show them what happens when theoretical nonsense collides with cold reality. Aboard Iowa, the atmosphere was electric with tensions so thick it made breathing difficult. Harold Jeff had spent the previous night unable to sleep. He ran through his loading procedures until the motions became automatic. Shell. Powder bags. Step back. Fire. Repeat. The gun captain of Turret 2. A veteran named Marcus Webb gathered his crew for final words. His voice barely rose above a whisper in the steel chamber. Listen to me carefully. Every admiral in the Pacific is watching us right now. They want us to fail. They expect us to fail. We are going to prove every single one of them wrong. When that order comes, you execute like we trained. No mistakes, no hesitation. Clear. The men nodded. Nobody spoke. The tension was suffocating. On the bridge, Captain Lee watched the radar screen as the target cruiser was towed into final position. 47 miles. The fire control team began inputting data into the Mark 1A. The mechanical brain hummed and clicked. Gears turning, solutions forming. Wind speed 14 knots from the northwest. Air temperature 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure 29.92 inches. Ship roll 4 degrees port, correcting. Wave period 11 seconds, correcting. The turrets began their slow rotation. The massive barrels elevated toward an angle that seemed impossible to anyone watching. 38 degrees, 39, 40, 41. The guns were pointing almost straight at the sky. Several officers on Baltimore exchanged skeptical glances. This could not possibly be correct. Lee picked up the communication handset. All stations report ready. The responses crackled through static. Turret 1 ready. Turret 2 ready. Turret 3 ready. Fire control solution locked. Radar tracking stable. Lee paused for 3 heartbeats. On the observation ship, admirals leaned forward. On the gun deck, sailors held their breath until their lungs burned. In the loading chamber, Harold Jeff gripped his station and waited for the single word that would determine the future of naval warfare. Fire. Iowa erupted like a volcano tearing itself apart. The blast was so violent that sailors on Baltimore 11 miles away felt the shockwave hit their chests like a physical punch. 9 16-inch shells screamed into the gray sky, climbing higher and higher until they disappeared into the overcast above. The deck plates vibrated. The air itself seemed to shudder with the violence of what had just been unleashed. And then, silence. 114 seconds of absolute agonizing silence. On the observation ship, Admiral Chandler checked his watch obsessively. The shells should be descending now. If Lee's calculations were correct, impact would occur in approximately 15 seconds. If the calculations were wrong, 9 shells would splash harmlessly into empty ocean miles from the target. 10 seconds remaining. The target cruiser sat motionless on the distant horizon. A tiny silhouette, barely visible through the most powerful binoculars money could buy. 5 seconds. Chandler began to lower his binoculars. A slight smile formed on his weathered face. Impact. The cruiser disappeared. Not damaged. Not hit. Disappeared entirely from the surface of the ocean. A column of flame and debris erupted from the target's position so massive that officers on Baltimore instinctively stepped backward. Secondary explosions tore through the old ship's hull as ammunition stores cooked off in chain reactions of destruction. Within 30 seconds, there was nothing left but smoke and scattered wreckage floating on the waves. 7 hits out of 9 shells fired at 47 miles in rough seas and poor visibility. Admiral Chandler slowly lowered his binoculars. His face had gone pale as bone. His hands were shaking. Captain Lee's voice crackled over the radio. Calm. Professional. Almost bored. Observation ship, this is Iowa. Target destroyed. Requesting assessment. Nobody on Baltimore could find words. Admiral Nimitz himself took the handset. His voice carried emotion that subordinates had never heard from him before. Iowa. This is Nimitz. Assessment confirmed. Target eliminated. Well done, Captain. Well done. The numbers told a story that could not be denied by any man alive. Before Lee's methods, American battleships averaged one confirmed hit per 18 salvos at ranges beyond 15 miles. Iowa had just achieved 7 hits with 9 shells at 47 miles. Accuracy improvement exceeded 400%. Within 1 week, every Iowa-class battleship began training with Lee's methods. Within 2 weeks, USS New Jersey engaged a Japanese destroyer group at 38 miles and scored multiple hits within the first 3 salvos. Within 1 month, Missouri eliminated an entire supply convoy at 42 miles before the enemy even understood they were under attack. Japanese commanders began reporting strange and terrifying losses to Tokyo. Ships that should have been completely safe were being destroyed by gunfire from beyond the horizon. Intelligence officers at Imperial Navy headquarters struggled to explain how American accuracy had improved so dramatically and so suddenly. A captured Japanese naval assessment from December 1944 revealed the psychological impact of Lee's revolution. Imperial Navy strategists had revised their safe distance calculations 3 times in 60 days. What had been considered a 20-mile safety buffer was now assumed completely inadequate at 50 miles. The Pacific Ocean had suddenly become a much more dangerous place for every Japanese vessel afloat. But success always brings new dangers, and Captain Lee's success had attracted attention from enemies far more patient and cunning than any admiral in Washington. In early December 1944, American intelligence intercepted a coded message from Japanese Combined Fleet headquarters. The message referenced American long-range gunnery specifically. It ordered a comprehensive review of countermeasures. Imperial Navy engineers were tasked with developing tactics to neutralize the American advantage by any means necessary. More troubling was a secondary intercept that made Rochefort go pale when he decoded it. Japanese agents had been activated in Pearl Harbor and San Diego. Their mission was crystal clear: gather technical intelligence on American fire control systems, photograph radar installations, make contact with civilian contractors, steal the secret that was killing their ships from distances they could not even comprehend. If the Japanese could understand exactly how the Americans were achieving such impossible accuracy, they could develop electronic countermeasures, jamming systems, deception tactics, something to level the playing field before their entire navy was destroyed, ship by ship from beyond the horizon. The Americans had fired the first shots of a new era in naval warfare. Now the Japanese were loading their answer, and the real war was just beginning. In Part 1, Captain Willis Lee proved that radar could guide shells to targets beyond the horizon. In Part 2, he fought his own Navy's bureaucracy and won. His demonstration at 47 miles shattered every assumption about battleship gunnery. 7 hits out of 9 shells. Accuracy improvement exceeding 400%. Within weeks, every Iowa-class battleship was training with Lee's methods. Japanese ships began dying at impossible ranges. Intelligence officers in Tokyo could not explain what was happening. But when word of American long-range supremacy reached Imperial Navy headquarters, the Japanese did not simply accept defeat. Here is a number that defined December 1944. Japanese naval losses to American battleship fire increased by 340% compared to the previous 3 months. Ships that once operated with confidence now sailed in constant fear of an enemy they could not see, could not reach, could not fight. And now this was no longer an experiment. This was total war. The message arrived at Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo on December 18, 1944, marked with the highest classification level. Addressed personally to Admiral Suemu Toyoda, commander of the Combined Fleet. The contents were devastating. Intelligence analysis confirmed that American Iowa-class battleships had achieved consistent gunnery accuracy at ranges exceeding 47 miles. The Americans were using advanced radar systems integrated with mechanical computing devices. These systems could track targets beyond visual range and calculate firing solutions with unprecedented precision. Every tactical assumption the Japanese Navy had made about safe operating distances was now obsolete. Toyota read the report in absolute silence. His staff waited. 5 full minutes passed before he spoke. "How many ships have we lost to this capability in the past 60 days?" The answer came in a trembling voice. 19 confirmed. Another 7 probable. 26 vessels destroyed or crippled by an enemy firing from beyond the horizon. Destroyers, cruisers, supply ships, all eliminated before their crews even understood they were under attack. The psychological impact was already spreading through the fleet like a disease. Captains who had once pressed aggressive attacks were now requesting permission to withdraw at the first sign of American battleships on their radar screens. Morale reports indicated growing fear among surface crews who felt completely helpless against an enemy they could not engage. Toyota ordered an immediate response. Japanese naval intelligence was tasked with discovering the exact specifications of American fire control systems. Engineers at Kure Naval Arsenal were commanded to develop countermeasures, anything that could neutralize the American advantage. Most critically, the combined fleet issued new tactical orders. All surface groups must maintain minimum distances of 50 miles from known American battleship positions. But 50 miles was not always possible. The Pacific was vast, but shipping lanes were narrow. Convoys had to follow predictable routes. Supply lines had to reach their destinations, or entire armies would starve on islands scattered across thousands of miles of ocean. The Japanese activated a more desperate measure. Intelligence agents in Hawaii and the American West Coast received urgent orders. Gather technical information on fire control systems by any means necessary. If Japan could understand exactly how the Americans were achieving such accuracy, perhaps they could develop electronic countermeasures, jamming systems, deception tactics, something, anything. 2 agents were captured in Pearl Harbor on December 22nd, attempting to photograph radar installations in restricted areas. A third was arrested in San Diego after making contact with a civilian contractor who worked on fire control computers. FBI interrogations revealed a coordinated effort to penetrate American naval technology programs. The Japanese were hunting for Lee's secret with desperate determination, but this was not the only challenge Lee faced that winter. On January 3, 1945, disaster struck. USS Wisconsin was conducting a long-range engagement against a Japanese convoy when her fire control computer suffered a catastrophic malfunction. The Mark 1A system locked up mid-calculation. It fed incorrect data to the gun turrets. The first salvo missed by nearly a mile. The second salvo fired before the crew realized the problem. It landed among American escort vessels operating nearby. 2 sailors killed, 11 wounded, friendly fire. The nightmare scenario every commander feared had finally happened. The incident sent shockwaves through the entire Navy. Critics who had opposed Lee's methods from the beginning seized on the tragedy as proof that the technology was unreliable and dangerous. Admiral Chandler, still bitter from his public humiliation at the demonstration, led calls for a comprehensive review of radar-directed gunnery. Some officers demanded an immediate return to traditional visual targeting until the computer systems could be made absolutely foolproof. Others questioned whether Lee's revolution was worth the risk when American sailors were now dying from their own technology. Lee found himself defending his life's work against accusations that his methods had killed the very men they were designed to protect. The investigation lasted 2 agonizing weeks. Technical experts examined the failed computer and determined that a manufacturing defect in one of the gear assemblies had caused the malfunction. The problem was fixable, preventable, not indicative of systemic failure. But the political damage was already done. For a brief, terrible moment, it seemed that everything Lee had built might collapse under the weight of one tragic accident. And then came Lingayen Gulf, the event that changed everything. January 9, 1945. The Philippines. The American invasion of Luzon required the largest naval bombardment since D-Day. Over 60 ships assembled in Lingayen Gulf to support the landing of 4 Army divisions on hostile beaches. Among them were 3 Iowa-class battleships: Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri. Their mission was clear: provide fire support for the beach assault. Destroy any Japanese surface forces that attempted to interfere with the largest amphibious operation in Pacific history. Japanese commanders knew the invasion was coming. They had assembled a desperate defense force. Destroyers, cruisers, the battered remnants of their once mighty combined fleet, scraped together for one final roll of the dice. Their plan was audacious. Wait until American ships committed to the beach bombardment when their guns were pointed at land targets. Then strike from the north with everything they had remaining. Close to torpedo range. Launch the long lances. Inflict maximum damage. Die if necessary. Take as many Americans as possible into the deep. The attack came at dawn on January 12th. American radar detected the assault force at 58 miles, approaching at high speed from the direction of Formosa. 2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, numerous smaller escorts, all racing south at maximum speed. On Iowa's bridge, Captain Lee studied the radar contacts with eyes that saw not ships, but mathematical equations waiting to be solved. He made a decision that would define the entire battle. He ordered all 3 Iowa-class battleships to break from the bombardment group, move to intercept, engage the Japanese at maximum range, destroy them before they could threaten a single transport ship carrying American soldiers to the beaches. The Japanese commander, Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima, watched his own radar as the American battleships turned toward him. He calculated distances. At their current closing speed, his force would enter torpedo range in approximately 45 minutes. If they could survive that long, they could still accomplish their mission. He did not understand that 45 minutes was a lifetime when facing American long-range guns. Iowa opened fire at 0617 hours. Range 47 miles. Fire. 9 barrels erupt. The blast tears across the deck. 2,700 pounds of steel screams into the sky. The shells climb higher than any aircraft can fly. They arc through the upper atmosphere. They disappear into the morning clouds. 114 seconds of flight time. The heavy cruiser, Ashigara, shudders. A 16-inch shell strikes her forward deck. The explosion tears through the bridge. The captain dies instantly. Most of his senior staff die with him. A second shell penetrates the engine room. Ashigara begins to slow. Smoke pours from wounds she cannot survive. Shima watches in horror. His flagship is dying. The Americans are still invisible beyond the horizon. New Jersey and Missouri add their fire. The ocean erupts with geysers as salvos walk across the Japanese formation. Shells fall like rain from an angry god. Each one carries more explosive power than anything in the Japanese arsenal. The destroyer Kasumi dies next. 3 shells bracket her. 1 strikes directly amidships. The ship breaks in half. She sinks in less than 2 minutes. 93 sailors go into the water. Only 12 will be rescued. Shima orders evasive action. His remaining ships scatter. They zigzag desperately trying to throw off American targeting. But Iowa's Mark 8 radar tracks every maneuver. The Mark 1A computer recalculates firing solutions in seconds. The shells keep coming. Relentless. Precise. Inescapable. The second heavy cruiser, Nachi, takes 6 hits in 12 minutes. Her forward turrets blown off their mountings. Her stern on fire from bow to waterline. Her captain bleeding from shrapnel wounds orders abandoned ship at 0641 hours. The remaining destroyers flee north. 2 are damaged by near misses that open their hulls to the sea. 1 takes a direct hit to her torpedo tubes. The long lance weapons she had hoped to use against the invasion fleet detonate in her own hull. She limps away at 8 knots, trailing oil and wreckage and the bodies of her crew. By 0700 hours, it is over. 7 Japanese ships sunk. 3 more damaged beyond repair. The attack force that had hoped to devastate the American invasion is instead annihilated by an enemy firing from beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond anything they had prepared for or imagined possible. Total American casualties in the engagement: 0. Harold Jeff emerges from turret 2 into the morning light. His arms are shaking from exhaustion. The barrel he helped load dozens of times is glowing with residual heat. The gun captain Marcus Webb speaks 4 words that capture everything: "We killed them all." Vice Admiral Shima was pulled from the water after Nachi finally slipped beneath the waves. He would later tell his interrogators that the battle felt like fighting gods. We could not see them. We could not reach them. We could only die. News of Lingayen Gulf spread through the Pacific Fleet like wildfire. American commanders who had doubted radar-directed gunnery were forced to confront undeniable results written in smoke and Japanese wreckage. A major enemy attack force annihilated at extreme range. 0 American casualties. The invasion of Luzon proceeded without significant naval interference. 4 Army divisions landed on schedule. Thousands of American soldiers walked onto those beaches alive because 7 Japanese warships never reached torpedo range. The statistical impact was staggering. Before the adoption of Lee's methods, American battleships averaged 1 confirmed kill per 18 salvos fired in surface engagements. At Lingayen Gulf, the Iowa-class ships achieved 1 confirmed kill per 4 salvos. Accuracy improvement exceeded 400% in combat conditions against maneuvering targets firing back. Japanese surface forces effectively ceased offensive operations after January 1945. The remaining ships of the combined fleet were ordered to avoid engagement with American battleships under any circumstances whatsoever. Intelligence intercepts revealed that Japanese commanders had classified Iowa-class vessels as priority threats to be evaded rather than engaged. The psychological effect extended far beyond the military. Japanese propaganda, which had long portrayed the Imperial Navy as invincible, fell completely silent on the subject of surface warfare. Newspapers that had once celebrated naval victories now focused exclusively on kamikaze attacks and homeland defense. The ocean belonged to the Americans now. On the American side, the victory at Lingayen Gulf became a symbol of absolute technological supremacy. War correspondents wrote glowing accounts of the one-sided massacre. Newsreels showed footage of Iowa's guns firing. The American public learned that their battleships could strike enemies from distances that defied imagination. Captain Lee received the Navy Cross for his role in developing and implementing radar-directed gunnery. The citation praised his vision and persistence in the face of institutional resistance. Admiral Chester Nimitz personally pinned the medal on Lee's chest during a ceremony broadcast across American radio networks. Harold Jeff and the crew of Turret 2 received a unit commendation for their performance at Lingayen Gulf. For a welder from Pittsburgh who had never expected to see combat, it was validation beyond anything he had imagined. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from the enemy itself. In February 1945, captured Japanese documents revealed that Imperial Navy headquarters had issued a formal assessment of American battleship capabilities. The document concluded that engaging Iowa-class vessels at any range was effectively suicidal. It recommended that all remaining Japanese surface assets be preserved for a final defensive action around the home islands, rather than wasted against an enemy that could not be defeated at sea. The Japanese had conceded control of the entire Pacific surface to Willis Lee and his revolution. The guns had spoken. The mathematics had proven unbreakable. The impossible had become doctrine. But what happened to the men who made this possible? What became of Captain Willis Lee after the last shell was fired and the last Japanese ship slipped beneath the waves? What fate awaited Harold Jeff when he finally returned to Pittsburgh and tried to become an ordinary man again? And what lessons from this forgotten revolution remain buried in classified archives, waiting decades to be discovered? This story has one final chapter. A chapter about recognition, denied, and glory forgotten. A chapter about what happens when war ends and peacetime politics begin, erasing the names of men who changed everything. A chapter about a legacy that nearly vanished from history entirely. In Part 4, we will follow these men beyond the battlefield. We will see what peace brought them and what peace took away. We will learn how their achievements were celebrated by some and deliberately erased by others. And we will discover why this story matters more today than it ever has before. The guns have fallen silent. But the story is not over. Not yet. Let us trace the arc of this extraordinary journey one final time. It began with Captain Willis Lee, a Kentucky farm boy who believed radar could guide shells to targets beyond the horizon. It continued with Harold Jeff, a Pittsburgh welder who loaded those shells into guns that could reach 47 miles. Together with the crew of USS Iowa, they destroyed 7 Japanese warships from a distance the enemy believed impossible. They fought their own Navy's bureaucracy and won. They survived a devastating friendly fire incident that nearly ended everything. They annihilated an entire Japanese attack force at Lingayen Gulf without losing a single American life. They changed naval warfare forever. But what happened to the men who made this possible? What became of their innovations after the guns fell silent and the ocean stopped burning? This story has one final twist, one that nobody expected. Because success, it turns out, sometimes comes with a price that history rarely bothers to record. Captain Willis Augustus Lee did not live to see the full impact of his revolution. On August 25, 1945, just 10 days after Japan announced its surrender, Lee suffered a massive heart attack aboard his flagship. He was 57 years old. The strain of years spent fighting 2 wars simultaneously had taken a toll that no medal could compensate and no doctor could reverse. One war against the Japanese, who wanted to kill him with torpedoes and shells. Another war against his own Navy, who wanted to silence him with paperwork and politics. Both wars had consumed him from the inside out. Lee died knowing that his methods had been vindicated beyond any reasonable doubt. He died knowing that radar-directed gunnery had become standard doctrine across the entire Pacific Fleet. But he never witnessed the formal Japanese surrender aboard USS Missouri on September 2nd. Never saw the Iowa-class battleships he championed become symbols of American naval supremacy that would endure for decades. Never heard the historians who would eventually call him one of the most influential naval tacticians of the 20th century. Never knew that his quiet revolution would reshape military technology for the next 8 decades and beyond. His funeral was held with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Admiral Chester Nimitz delivered the eulogy personally. He described Lee as a man who understood that the future belongs to those willing to fight for it, even when the fight is against your own people. Among the mourners stood officers who had once dismissed Lee's ideas as theoretical nonsense belonging in science fiction novels. They stood in silence beneath gray skies. Perhaps they reflected on how close they had come to losing a war because they refused to listen to a quiet man with thick glasses who saw numbers the way other men see colors. Admiral Theodore Chandler, who had led the resistance to radar, directed gunnery with such passionate contempt, continued his career after the war. But he never achieved the prominence he had desperately sought his entire life. His name appears in few histories of the Pacific Campaign. When he retired in 1952, his farewell speech notably avoided any mention of the tactical revolution he had tried so hard to prevent. History remembers the innovators. It forgets the men who stood in their way. And what of Harold Jeff, the welder from Pittsburgh, who had loaded shells into Iowa's guns during the battles that changed everything? Jeff returned home in November 1945 to a hero's welcome that lasted exactly 1 afternoon. His family gathered at the train station. His mother wept into her handkerchief. His father, a steel worker who had spent his life building the framework of American industry with calloused hands and a broken back, shook his son's hand and said simply, "You did good, son." Then life resumed its ordinary rhythm. Jeff went back to welding steel beams. He married his high school sweetheart in 1947. He raised 3 children in a modest house on Pittsburgh's north side, where the sound of the steel mills never stopped humming. He rarely spoke about the war. When he did speak, he never mentioned the battles that historians would later study as turning points in naval warfare. In 1978, a graduate student researching Iowa-class battleships tracked Jeff down for an interview. The old welder, now 62 years old, with white hair and hands still rough from decades of honest labor, sat in his backyard and described loading shells into Turret 2 with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to describe welding a steel beam on a Tuesday morning. When asked if he understood at the time that he was participating in history, Jeff laughed softly. "We were just doing our jobs. The captain figured out how to hit them from far away. We just made sure the shells got where they needed to go. That is all any of us did. Our jobs." Jeff died in 1994 at the age of 73. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette mentioned his Navy service in a single sentence. It included no details about the battles he had fought or the revolution he had helped create with his aching arms and steady hands. But the true legacy of Willis Lee was never about medals pinned on chests or obituaries printed in newspapers. It was about what came next. The fire control systems that Lee championed aboard Iowa became the foundation for every precision-guided weapon system that followed. The principles he proved in combat transformed military technology for the next 8 decades and counting. Radar could direct fire with mathematical precision. Mechanical computers could solve ballistic equations faster than human minds. Technology could extend the reach of destruction beyond anything previously imagined. These principles shaped weapon development across the entire world. During the Korean War Iowa-class, battleships provided fire support using updated versions of Lee's systems. At the Siege of Wonsan in 1951, USS Missouri fired over 2,000 rounds at enemy positions along the Korean coastline. She achieved accuracy rates that would have been impossible using traditional gunnery methods. North Korean commanders reported that American naval gunfire was striking targets with surgical precision from distances beyond 25 miles. The ghosts of Lingayen Gulf were still firing. The Vietnam War saw the return of Iowa herself. Recommissioned in 1968, she provided naval gunfire support along the coast, with her 16-inch guns still thundering across the water. Her targeting system's descendants of the Mark 1A that Lee had trusted with his career guided shells into enemy positions with accuracy that ground commanders called miraculous. Marines pinned down on hostile beaches heard those guns firing from over the horizon and knew that Willis Lee's mathematics were still saving American lives 2 decades after his death. The Gulf War of 1991 marked the final combat deployment of the Iowa class. USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin fired Tomahawk cruise missiles and 16-inch shells at Iraqi targets during Operation Desert Storm. The missiles were direct descendants of the precision guidance concepts Lee had pioneered on a quiet morning in 1944, when he first looked at a radar screen and saw not a detection device, but a revolution. They struck targets hundreds of miles inland with accuracy measured in meters rather than yards. When Missouri fired her last shots of the war, her crew included sailors who had never heard of Willis Lee or Harold Jeff or the battles that had made their weapons possible. But every shell they fired, every system they operated, every principle of precision warfare they employed traced its lineage back to a captain who believed that mathematics could change the world. Historians estimate that Lee's methods contributed to the destruction of over 40 Japanese surface vessels between October 1944 and August 1945. More importantly, the psychological impact effectively ended Japanese naval offensive operations entirely. The Imperial Navy retreated to defensive positions around the home islands and never recovered. The war was shortened. Lives were saved. History was altered by one man's refusal to accept that the impossible could not be done. But the technical legacy extends far beyond military applications. The fire control computers that Lee championed were among the most sophisticated mechanical calculating devices ever built by human hands. After the war, engineers who had worked on these systems helped develop the electronic computers that would transform civilian society in ways nobody could have predicted. The mathematical principles used to calculate shell trajectories found applications in everything from airline scheduling to weather prediction to the space program that would eventually put American boots on the surface of the moon. Lee's revolution did not end when the guns stopped firing. It simply changed form and kept going. But the most important lesson from this story is not about technology at all. It is about the courage required to challenge assumptions that everyone accepts as absolute truth. It is about the persistence necessary to fight institutional resistance that would rather let men die than admit it was wrong. It is about the faith required to believe in ideas that others dismiss as impossible, insane, forbidden. Willis Lee faced opposition from every direction simultaneously. Senior officers told him his methods were theoretical nonsense. Experienced gunners told him radar could never replace human judgment honed over decades of service. Bureaucrats told him the Navy could not afford to retrain thousands of sailors on unproven techniques that might fail catastrophically in combat. He persisted anyway. He collected data when nobody asked for it. He ran experiments when nobody authorized them. He built alliances with anyone willing to listen for 5 minutes. And when he finally got his chance to prove his theories under the most hostile conditions his enemies could arrange, he delivered results so overwhelming that even the men who hated him could not deny what their own eyes had witnessed. This pattern repeats throughout military history with almost predictable regularity. The visionary innovator fighting against institutional inertia that would rather preserve tradition than preserve lives. Billy Mitchell argued for air power when generals still believed cavalry charges would decide future wars. They court-martialed him for his trouble. Hyman Rickover pushed for nuclear submarines when the Navy establishment dismissed atomic propulsion as impractical fantasy. They tried to force him into retirement before he could prove them wrong. In each case, individuals with unpopular ideas faced ridicule, resistance, and professional destruction before ultimately transforming their institutions from the inside out. The same pattern appears in civilian life with equal force. Every major innovation, from the personal computer to the smartphone to the electric car, faced armies of skeptics who insisted that the established ways were better, safer, more proven. Every breakthrough required someone willing to persist through rejection and failure and mockery until the world caught up with what they already knew to be true. And there is one detail about this story that almost no one knows. A detail that was buried in classified archives for over 7 decades. In 2018, the National Archives declassified a collection of documents related to Pacific naval operations during World War II. Among the thousands of pages of routine reports and operational orders was a folder labeled simply Long-Range Gunnery Assessment, 1945. Inside was a memorandum written by a Japanese naval intelligence officer in the final weeks of the war. The officer had been tasked with understanding how American battleships had achieved such devastating accuracy at extreme ranges. He had interviewed survivors of Lingayen Gulf and other engagements. He had studied captured equipment pulled from the ocean floor. He had analyzed shell fragment patterns recovered from the wreckage of ships that Lee's guns had destroyed. And he had reached a conclusion that his superiors in Tokyo refused to accept even as their empire crumbled around them. The Americans, he wrote, had not simply improved their technology. They had changed their entire philosophy of warfare. They had embraced the idea that machines could make decisions faster and more accurately than humans. They had integrated radar and computers and communications into a unified system that functioned as a single entity rather than a collection of separate components operated by separate men making separate decisions. But the most striking passage came at the very end of the memorandum. We knew the Americans had radar. We knew they had computing machines. But we believed these were tools to assist human gunners, not to replace human judgment. We did not understand that they had built something entirely new, something we had no answer for. By the time we realized our mistake, it was already far too late. The document was stamped with a date, August 14th, 1945. One day before Japan announced its unconditional surrender. The officer who wrote those words was captured 2 weeks later. He spent the remainder of his life as a professor of engineering at Tokyo University, teaching the next generation about the systems that had defeated his nation. He never knew that his assessment would eventually be declassified and read by historians seeking to understand why Japan lost the Pacific War. But his words captured something essential about Lee's revolution that transcends any single battle or any single weapon. It was not about better guns. It was not about more powerful computers. It was about a fundamentally different way of thinking. A way that the Japanese, for all their tactical brilliance and warrior spirit, had never imagined was possible. So let us return to where this story began. A captain with thick glasses and an idea that admirals called impossible. A welder from Pittsburgh who loaded shells into guns that could reach beyond the curve of the earth. A battleship named Iowa that proved the impossible was merely unexplored territory waiting to be conquered by anyone brave enough to try. From a former Olympic shooter with a theory about radar to 7 Japanese ships destroyed at 47 miles. From an entire enemy fleet forced to abandon offensive operations to a legacy of precision warfare that continues to protect lives and shape conflicts to this very day. Willis Lee and the men who served under him demonstrated that innovation and persistence and raw courage can overcome any obstacle. Even the crushing weight of tradition itself. Even the contempt of powerful men who would rather watch sailors die than admit they were wrong. The numbers speak for themselves across 8 decades. Over 40 enemy ships destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of shells fired with unprecedented accuracy. Countless American lives saved because battles were won from distances that kept sailors beyond the reach of enemy weapons. A revolution in military technology that shaped every precision-guided system built since 1945. From Tomahawk missiles to GPS-guided bombs to the smart weapons that define modern warfare today. That is the power of one man refusing to accept that the impossible cannot be done. If you know similar stories of innovations that changed history, share them in the comments below. World War II produced hundreds of breakthroughs that began as ideas dismissed as crazy, impractical, and forbidden. This is just one of them. Subscribe to discover more untold stories from history. Stories about ordinary people who accomplished extraordinary things. About ideas that seemed insane until they changed the world. About the moments when courage and innovation intersected to alter the course of human events forever. From a Kentucky farm boy who saw numbers the way other men see colors to a revolution that transformed naval warfare for generations. Captain Willis Lee proved that the experts are not always right. That tradition is not always wisdom. That one person armed with mathematics and determination can change the world. Here is the truth that Lee understood, that Harold Jeff demonstrated with his aching arms, that the crew of USS Iowa proved beyond any shadow of doubt. The horizon is not a limit. It is an invitation, and those who accept that invitation are the ones who change everything.